Hi, I'm Justin with the Youth Community Initiative, a subgroup of Youth Community Service, YCS, stationed here in Palo Alto. We reached out to you guys to anonymously submit questions about mental health that we could interview an experienced professional about. So here we are with Dr. Joshi. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Justin and Ben. Hi, everybody. I'm Shashank Joshi, and I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm also a pediatrician. I'm a professor of psychiatry and pediatrics and education at Stanford University. And I've been working in the community for about 20 years. Um, my wife and I have 3 teenagers. And so we have the perspective not only of a professional, but even more importantly, as a parent. Oh, and I used to be a teenager myself back in the day. Yeah, so that's a very good question. And it's on a lot of people's minds, especially now that we're dealing with this very unusual situation of having to shelter in place. And we don't have some of the usual activities that help us to cope in times of stress. And so, as I understand your question, kind of what's normal, what's not, and how do I know when to worry that I might be dealing with this thing called depression, a medical illness? So, the first thing that we think about as professionals when we're with a teenager is we want to know what a person likes to do for fun, what they enjoy, how their mood is typically. And so if we hear that someone is struggling with sad mood more days than not over the last week or two, and they're starting to lose interest in the things that bring them joy and happiness, we start to get concerned that they might be dealing with more than the typical ups and downs of being a young person, being a teenager. And this can actually apply to children as well. But I'm going to guess that the majority of your audience here are going to be middle and high schoolers who are either preteens or teenagers or young adults. And so as a professional, we're going to ask questions related to mood. We're going to ask questions related to interest. And do you still enjoy doing the things that you typically like to do? If either of those questions is giving us concern, then we're going to start asking about things like, have there been any changes in your appetite that have resulted in any changes in weight? So are you eating way more or way less than usual in the last couple of weeks? Are you sleeping more or less than usual the last couple of weeks? Are you feeling tired or having less energy? Are you feeling like everything is your fault and you're not really good at anything? Are you having trouble concentrating? Are you caring less about school than you usually would, or are you not doing as well in school as usual? And are you having thoughts of harming yourself or thoughts of taking your life? So these are the signs and symptoms of depression, the medical condition, which is more than the typical ups and downs in mood that people get as part of a normal everyday life. In particular, with the situation that we're in now, where we're not able to enjoy time with friends in person, we're not able to participate in some of the activities or most of the activities we're used to doing with others. And so those are the things that we would want people to be thinking about and parents to be thinking about. If you see signs of any of the items I just listed in that list, that would be a good time to contact your pediatrician or adolescent medicine specialist to have them actually screen for depression or anxiety, which is another condition that can go along with excessive worry or stress in times like we're dealing with now. There are different types of depression, absolutely. In fact, we generally classify depression as mild, moderate, or severe. And so people who have mild depression may only have a couple of the symptoms that I named, maybe 3 or 4 of them, but they are impairing their function. So people who start to lose interest in things, and people who are having sadder mood than usual, and people who are having trouble sleeping, that can be pretty disruptive to your life, but it may not completely knock you out of life. So you may still be engaging with activities online with friends. You may still be listening to the kind of music you like to, or making art or reading, or you may still be able to enjoy a few things, but the sadness is something that is more present than it had been previously. We would call that mild, and typically that can be supported through something called talk therapy or psychotherapy. And that can be done through virtual support, like through Zoom or some other what we call telehealth method, where you could connect with a school counselor or connect with someone in your doctor's office. Moderate depression would be if you have a few more of the symptoms that are causing more impairment and are really making you feel like you're not enjoying anything. You've had a lot of the changes that we talked about, changes in appetite, changes in your sleep habits, changes in your mood, really not enjoying things you usually like to do, maybe even having episodes of crying. And that would be an even more important reason to connect with your doctor. Your doctor can provide some tools for what we call screening, where they'd ask you a few questions, and then they'd be able to diagnose and even begin treatment if needed. And then severe depression would be where if you've had all of the symptoms that I've talked about that are happening more days than not for, say, 2 weeks, and where you're really just feeling very dark and gloomy all of the time, unable to connect with friends or do any of the things you enjoy doing, maybe even thinking a lot of the time about ways to harm yourself or thinking about your own death. And that is what we would call severe depression. So yes, depression looks different in different people. People from different cultures may express their depressive symptoms differently. For example, in our community here in Palo Alto and in the rest of Santa Clara County, where we've had a lot of well-being initiatives, and we teach a lot about depression in the schools, and the kinds of conversations we're having now are occurring in classes like living skills and in other places on campus. People are getting referred earlier, so they don't come in when there's a crisis, but they come in when they're starting to show signs of the distress really affecting their lives. So we want people to be able to reach out early and often and not wait until there's a crisis. And so in our community, we tend to have these conversations. In other communities, maybe they don't have the conversation. So they don't use their words, but they may actually start having physical manifestations. So they might be having more frequent headaches or stomach aches, or not be able to sleep properly. But if they're not in a family or in a culture that really allows for the expression of distress, where there's a lot of stigma, they may be in a family where they just don't talk about mental health issues, then again, it becomes important to reach out to a friend and talk to a friend about it. Maybe that friend can get their parent to get involved with your friend's parent and have a conversation. So one doesn't have to deal with this alone, but it is important as a friend, if you notice any of these signs or symptoms in someone you're concerned about, that you talk with them and understand what they're going through. And what kids who are dealing with depressive symptoms need the most is to feel connected, to feel like they're not alone, to feel like there's someone there to really listen to them. And if that can't be with their parent, maybe that's with you as a friend. And really just being there to listen is probably the most important intervention you can do when someone has mild or moderate symptoms, is really just be there for them and be available to connect, picking up the phone or connecting via a FaceTime or some other kind of virtual space where you can see their face can be a very important intervention as a friend. Yeah, so, we all deal with stress and anxiety from time to time. And I think that now there are actually a lot of really good websites out there and coping resources that you can access. In fact, on the superintendent's page of Palo Alto Unified School District, there's a number of resources that you can connect with. But just a few of the highlights, and then I'll give you a few websites that you can go to get some ideas. probably 3 or 4 of the most important parts of what you already do. Taking care of yourself. Use this time where we're not having to get up super early to get ready to get to school, to make sure you're getting enough sleep. Getting enough sleep is probably the most important thing that teenagers have a hard time to do when we are in regular school. Between your biological clocks changing as you become teenagers, where your melatonin, which is the chemical in your brain that tells you it's time for sleep, that chemical hormone doesn't peak until around 10:30 or 11 o'clock when you're a teenager. That's why it's hard to get to bed before then. Well, now you can actually sleep a full 9 hours, right? You're supposed to be getting between 9 and 10 hours of sleep. So that's probably the first thing. Take care of your mind, take care of your body by getting enough sleep, by eating healthy, and by really paying attention to the kinds of things you'd like to do normally for yourself, but you feel like you can't because you're too stressed because of school. The second thing is staying connected with people. That's a really good way to alleviate stress and anxiety. Just connect with some of your really good friends on a Google Hangout, or just, individually. Make sure that you're practicing, what we call it, just practicing gratitude. In this community, in most communities in Santa Clara County, we're actually pretty fortunate. We have not had the surges yet in the corona cases that they've had on the East Coast. We've got running water. We've got an internet that works. The grocery stores are still open. We haven't had an earthquake here. And there's a lot to be thankful for. So maybe taking stock of 1 or 2 things you're really thankful for every day. It's called a gratitude exercise. Checking in on maybe some older folks, calling your grandparents every day or every other day, even just for a couple of minutes, can mean a lot, not only for them, but also for you, because it creates connection for you. And particularly if you have uncles or grandparents or aunts or uncles who are above 60 or 70, it can be very lonely and isolating for them. And so that connection is very important for being able to not only alleviate stress and anxiety, but importantly, cultivating your own well-being. And cultivating your well-being and resilience is what's going to get you through tough times. And right now, our world is going through a tough time. So staying connected. Then I would say the third thing is taking breaks. So if you're doing your schoolwork, if you're online and connected with something academic or something you need to be doing, make sure you're taking breaks from that. Make sure that you're getting out at least a couple times a day. If you have a dog, or if you have a pet that you can walk, that would be great. Otherwise, just go out and take the walk for yourself. So you're taking a break and getting outside. Actually, the weather in California right now is really beautiful. So it's kind of ironic in the face of this pandemic. We do still have the sunshine and we can get outside. The fourth thing that I like to think about is unplugging. So even though it's important to stay informed about what's going on, it's also important to just stay away from the news for a little bit and not be constantly checking for what the latest coronavirus update is more than once a day. You can designate one person in your house to be the information gatherer. Maybe it's your parents, so that you don't have to be constantly checking the news, because that can make us more anxious. And then the last thing is, if you're worried about yourself or worried about a friend, then seek help. And the resources I'm going to share with you has 24/7 hotlines where you can connect with someone. I know, because I'm a part of some of these help-seeking resources, that those folks are well-trained and they're very busy, and they're ready to take your call if you need to connect, whether you're worried about yourself or a friend. Well, that's a tricky one, because I don't think we have a one-size-fits-all for. Let's take the example that you have a friend, as you just described, who is just really in a very they're really in a hole. They're kind of in a deep, isolated place in their mind, and they don't really want to connect. The fact that they're allowing you in and talking with you about how they feel is a sign that there is something about them that wants to stay alive. There's something about them that wants to connect and is willing to hear from you that actually, while it may not feel like that right now, that their life really is worth living, and that their life is very important to you, and that you as a friend believe in them, and you believe in their life, and you believe in their purpose, and that you are you're stronger because you're their friend. And for people who are really feeling melancholy and depression and just real darkness, the light comes from a friend reaching out and just being there. And again, it's not your job to solve their problem or be their therapist, but being a good friend just means you're continuing to connect with them. And no matter how um, uh, sad or isolating or really dark their thoughts are, the fact that you continue to come back and connect with them and call them is a sign that there is light around this person who's just feeling a lot of darkness right now. Um, I have heard, as we've done these education sessions with teenagers, I've heard some other teens talk about what's really helpful, and some of the ideas that they've talked about is, just being there and telling your friend that they're worth it, that they may not feel like their life is worth living, but you see their life as worth it, and you really value them as their friend. And if you feel comfortable, you can even tell them that they're like a brother or sister, like you love them like a brother or sister, and that they're really important to you. That they just need to hold on a little longer, that this kind of feeling of emptiness and desolation is temporary, and that you're going to be there to walk with them through this. And then you also want to try, if they're comfortable, if your friend's comfortable, of maybe making sure you're connecting with other people, say either their sibling or a parent or someone else or one of your friends, so you don't feel like you're handling this on your own, that you are not their only friend, but there are some other people that they can also stay connected with. So you might ask their permission, to bring in another common friend, and maybe you have a chat together, and that might allow the atmosphere to be lightened a little bit. So I think it's a good, it's probably a good practice to not feel like you by yourself can convince someone that life is worth living, but you may be able to connect with them and allow them to let your light in. And little by little, they may start to feel like their life is worth living because they're continuing to live it. They're living it by
Mhm.
engaging with you as a friend, by letting other friends in, and then hopefully soon by being able to get back to the activities that they like to do together, physically together with friends and not just virtually. Well, if the friend has shared with you that they're about to engage in self-harming or they're thinking about taking their life, they have shared that with you probably because you are very important to them. And that's a place where you need to leverage the deep relationship you have as a close friend by getting a trusted adult involved. Um, that's one of the most important things you can do, is not to keep that secret just within the two of you, but actually getting someone else involved, because um, that's a lot of trust they're putting in you. And they may tell you, I really need you to keep it a secret, but they are, the part of them that's trying to live is the part that just told you what they're thinking about doing. And that part needs you to reach out to a trusted adult. It might be your parent. It might be an older sibling. It might be someone who your friend knows who can get them some help. It might be that friend's parent. Um, but it's so important, because as friends, you often have the window into what your depressed friend might be thinking or feeling way more than anyone else in their universe. Now, unless they're connected with a therapist already, in which case you want to encourage them to make sure that they are connecting with their therapist or their counselor or the person they go to for support. But many times, teenagers around our county are the first line of support. And in that case, we really want you to be there as a friend, but not to do it alone. Um, I'm going to share a couple of resources with you. You might know about the crisis text line. The crisis
I've
text
heard.
line is available for this kind of support 24/7. If you go to the website called herdalliance.org, herd like I heard you, HEARD, alliance, all one word, .org, you'll see a number of resources there, including for crisis text line at the very top, and the Santa Clara County and the San Mateo County um, crisis hotlines. There's also on the very first hit on the web pages for resources for coronavirus coping and support. And that resource is from the National Center on School Mental Health. And we're a partner organization with them. So we've put their link right there. There are a number of resources for dealing with the mental health issues that come up, dealing with stress, how to cope during these really uncertain times. Also on our webpage are a number of resources, websites, information sites, quick facts about things like depression, anxiety, substance use, how to support a friend, what to do if you're worried about someone, ways to cultivate your own well-being. So that's all you can get to there from that website, herdalliance.org, and that's a collaboration of our local schools, primary care, and mental health organizations. And that site's been around for about 10 years, and it's constantly being updated. The second one that's really good is the Greater Good Science Center, and that's just greatergood.berkeley.edu. And that's just a really great treasure trove of different best practices, ideas to cultivate your own well-being, ideas to stay safe but stay connected in the era of coronavirus, ways to practice gratitude, ways to cultivate your own happiness and well-being, even if you're struggling with some mental health issues, ways to help others to feel better and stay connected. And then some really simple recommendations for how to practice your own well-being. Everything from some of the things we just talked about to some simple things you can do at home, family game night, doing something fun for someone out of the ordinary, just to be silly. You can make jokes, and you can cultivate your sense of humor in this time, because again, we have a lot to be thankful for right now. We still have Wi-Fi. We still have ways to stay connected. And that's actually not true with other kinds of disasters. So those are two websites that will be links to other sources of information that I think people have found really helpful. Well, not only do I believe that that should be done, that's actually what the science shows us to be the most important way, not only to promote well-being, but also to prevent mental health crises, and as a really important suicide prevention measure. So you might know that in Palo Alto Unified School District and a number of other districts around our two counties, they've put into place this program called Sources of Strength. And Sources of Strength is a peer-led universal well-being promotion and suicide prevention program. And the very core of that program is training peer leaders. These are the people who really are the opinion and thought leaders on campuses among the students to propagate messages of hope, help, and strength. And that is a program that is a national best practice, and it shows that you can not only help prevent suicide, but importantly, you can promote well-being, you can promote connection. There's a lot of really interesting initiatives that have occurred that have been student-led in our school district. And a couple of them that come to mind are things like the Bring Change to Mind clubs at both Gunn and Pally. The newspapers have columns regularly on people who have struggled with mental health issues and how they got better. And the one that comes to mind, of course, is it's called Changing the Narrative. That's published in the Oracle, the Gunn High School newspaper. That's available online. They're still publishing. They're still doing Changing the Narrative. And you have people from the captain of the football team to the principal to the custodian, to other people on campus who talk about ways that they may have struggled in their life and how they got better. What are the things that help them get through the tough times? And so I think a lot of the initiatives in our district have been successful because students are the ones who have really been the ones driving the change. And so I've been really fortunate to be part of that and see what I can learn every day as I interact with our students and our graduates, our alumni, because they often have the best, most relevant ideas for helping to promote mental health. Well, it sounds like that person, if that's been going on for more than just a day or two, they may be dealing with depression or feeling overwhelmed or feeling trapped or feeling like they can't deal with some of the issues that are going on in their lives. And so that's a time where you as a friend can connect with them and really try and understand what has been going on. And so if you hear that they're struggling with their mood, they've lost interest in the things that they like doing, they've had changes in their sleep patterns, and they're not eating the way they usually do, and they're feeling like, they can't concentrate, they're feeling a lot of burden and feeling like they're a burden to others, or they're feeling shame and guilt, they're having thoughts about harming themselves. I mean, you there have seen, you now know that these are signs that this person might be struggling with depression. And that's, again, a time to get someone else involved, either by telling your parent or telling someone else who can talk with that person or talk with their parent to get them some help. And it might start with having them connect with their pediatrician. On the other hand, it could be that they're just they're just going through a hard time. And it's not necessarily a mental health issue yet, but it may be that they need a little boost to get something going. So, you might plan to connect with them. Say if you're having a hard time, you hear they're having a hard time getting out of bed. Well, plan to connect with them at FaceTime at like 9 a.m. or send them some funny videos, or try and engage with them in some other way and see if you can, along with the help of another friend or two, like give them a boost. And if that boost is not working, if they're not connecting, if they're not answering you back, yeah, it may be that even though having time with friends, connecting with people who are important to them are the things that help them, that depression may be doing the thinking for them. Depression, when it's a medical illness, takes over the way that you experience the world. We know from neuroscience that the pathways responsible for mood in the brain, there's an area of the brain where these pathways go. And those pathways are not only responsible for mood, they're also responsible for things like cognition and memory and being able to regulate your sleep and being able to have you do the things you want to do. And when depression takes over, it's very manipulative. And depression, the medical condition, is really, it just clouds the way you experience your life. And so that person that you mentioned, even though they know they like to get up out of bed, they like to get started with their day, they like to connect with friends, if the depression is taken over, they're not doing that. So part of what we try to do as therapists is really get them to push themselves to at least get up out of bed at a regular time, take a shower, and try to start their day. So it might just be the baby step in the morning is just trying to get up at a certain time, and at night trying to get to bed by a certain time, so that they can really try and start their day in some manner that sounds like it might be a routine. And again, we bring it back to sleep. If you as a friend can be the model and encourage them and say, hey, if you can't get to bed till 11, well, don't get up before like 8 o'clock in the morning. There's no reason that they need to get up right now while we're all sheltering in place before 8 o'clock if they're going to bed at 11. And that can set the foundation for starting to get mentally healthy. That's by getting enough sleep. And part of the benefit of what we have, even though there's a lot of difficulty people are dealing with having to shelter in place, is that we can finally start getting the right amount of sleep. So hopefully that's helpful for your friend. The number 5150 is not only the subject of, I think, a number of rappers and pop singers have sung about 5150 because they're from California. That's a California statute for involuntary hospitalization. The answer to your question is I don't know, because if someone is self-harming and it is in a person who has had a history of self-harming and now they've talked about maybe wanting to end their life, then it may be that that person has to connect with a mental health professional to get an assessment to see, is there an immediate safety risk to their life? Or is the self-harming a way of dealing with the kind of stress in their life? And we always think of self-harming as something that people do because they're very desperate to distract themselves away from this psychological pain or stress they may be feeling. So while self-harming is not something we consider healthy at all, it doesn't necessarily mean that person wants to end their life. While what they're doing is not considered healthy, that is not necessarily a reason for automatically sending someone to the hospital. And I think our counselors in our school district, at least, are all pretty well trained in that and know that when you're self-harming, it's really an expression of, real struggle and suffering, and that person needs some help and needs to talk through it, develop their coping strategies and distraction techniques, and cultivate their well-being. And in the moment, it's probably true that they need to talk with someone. They need to connect with someone who can help them to deal with the stressor in a more healthy way. But simply telling your counselor that you're struggling and that you've harmed yourself or you've cut on yourself does not automatically mean you're headed to the hospital. What it hopefully means is that person will get you some help and will at least get you some attention for listening about what's going on to help you work through it. That's tapping into this idea that mood, as we experience it as humans, is a very complex phenomenon. It's based a lot on biology. It's based a lot on your circadian rhythms as you become a young teenager and older teenager and a young adult. Your body rhythms, your biorhythms, and your moods change because your brain is growing, your brain is maturing, and all of these chemicals in your brain and your body are involved in a very intricate dance that can be affected by many things. For example, if you're getting enough to eat and you're getting enough sleep, you've probably right there got a lot of protection against feeling super stressed. On the other hand, if you're sleep deprived and you're not eating typically to keep yourself healthy, like often happens during exam periods, you might be more vulnerable to periods of extreme anxiety or depression. And so that's why we always recommend really trying to take care of oneself. In spite of that, sometimes we get down. That's part of an everyday human experience. You can have days when you feel down, but typically for teenagers, we expect them to bounce back. So depression, if it is depression, has many different inputs. You have the biological input from the neurotransmitters. You have the psychological and sociological input from what's going on in your family, what's going on in your neighborhood, what's going on in society. Right now, we're dealing with a global pandemic infection. The coronavirus, is very specific coronaviruses that are this one particular one that's affecting everyone's community. And that's not something that we can do something about, but we can take steps to protect ourselves. And so are you able to do that? Now there's a new recommendation to not to go out of your house unless you can put on some sort of like cloth mask or something to protect yourself, because we just don't know where the virus is right now. And again, in our community, as of April 2nd, we have not had the kind of surge that other places have had. But if you are in a place where suddenly a lot of people are getting sick, yeah, that's another contributor that may make you feel bad. And there we have a particular reason. Your friend is asking about, what if I just feel bad for no particular reason? It can happen. Doesn't mean it's depression. But if it lasts for more than a day or two, and if it's in association with some of the other symptoms we talked about, not only changes in your mood, feeling sad, but also losing interest in the things you want to do and having disruptions in your sleep or appetite, then it may be time to talk to someone because you might be dealing with the beginning of a depressive episode. But if it's just for a few hours or if it happens here and there, but then you bounce back, I would attribute that to what happens as you grow older and what happens as you become an older teenager. And there it's important to try and get to the things that you enjoy doing and really kind of force yourself to go to something that you enjoy to help yourself feel better, especially if these feelings you're having of just feeling bad are not going away. And then in spite of what you're doing to help yourself feel better and coping, you're engaging in the kinds of coping resources and activities that you enjoy, you still feel bad, then again, that would be a reason to talk to your parent or talk to your doctor about that, because then you may be dealing with something else like a major depression or something like that. Well, anxiety and depression are, as we use them in the medical field, have to do with these states that, again, we may all experience levels of stress and worry as we are living our lives, especially in the current time that we live in the face of COVID-19. But anxiety as a disorder happens when we get so worried, we are so stressed that we cannot calm ourselves down. When it starts to affect the kinds of things we enjoy doing, when it prevents us from getting sleep, when it prevents us from taking part in the activities we want to take part in because we're so nervous or so worried that something bad is going to happen. Then again, we may be talking about an anxiety disorder. But in this time of uncertainty, I would say it's pretty expected that we would all have some stress and anxiety about what's going to happen next. And in that way, I use the term anxiety not as anxiety disorder, the medical condition, but having anxiety about what we're dealing with. And it just refers to this experience of excessive stress or worry, often about things that we don't have control over. And there again, we get back to what are the kinds of things that you can do to cope in times where you don't have control of things? What are some things you do have control over? And the difference between that and depression is anxiety really has to do with this excessive stress and worry. Depression really has to do with your mood. And when your mood is sadder than usual for more days than not over a period of 1 to 2 weeks, that's also associated with things like losing interest in the things you want to do, changes in your sleep or appetite, having difficulty concentrating, feeling like you're a burden to others. Whereas anxiety is really referring to that excessive stress and worry that you may not only feel in your mind and in the way you think, but you may also feel it in your body. Your heart may be racing, your palms may be sweaty, you might feel jittery and on edge. And it may be to the point where you can't calm yourself down. And that again, if you're feeling that level of discomfort, there's no reason you have to struggle with that. That may be a sign that you need some help. And that would be the time to reach out to a trusted adult, ideally one of your parents, but if not, some other adults that you trust or your doctor. And even though we're in the time of COVID and people are focusing in clinics on those people in our community who might be having signs of COVID, doctors are still open for business, and they're usually seeing people in their clinics. And if they're not seeing you in the clinics, they're seeing you virtually on a screen like we're interacting now. And so our clinics are still open for business, and we know we're certainly seeing an increase in young people coming to the clinic just to talk through their problems, or whether they're worried about someone else. Maybe they're worried about um, the health status of an older person in their life. But again, if you go to those web resources, as I mentioned before, the herdalliance.org, there's a number of helplines on there that if you just need someone to talk to, you can reach out. And those numbers are typically available 24/7. There's crisis text line. And then there's the Greater Good Society, where you can get a lot of ideas about cultivating your own mental health and well-being, not only during the time of COVID, but after we get through this. Yeah, so again, I would say the kinds of things that you probably have found that you do typically to take care of yourself become even more important. We're just doing these things virtually for the most part. Now, the exception is we're still allowed to go out by ourselves or with our family members. We can still take our dogs for walks. We can still go for walks or runs ourselves. We can still go for bike rides. So I think it gets back to those basic things that we highlighted earlier: taking care of your mind and body, finding ways to release stress and anxiety, staying connected to friends, but also reaching out, especially to people you haven't talked with in a while, in particular, older people, your aunts or uncles, your grandparents. Connecting with them every day or every other day can be um, enormously meaningful, not only for them, but also for you. Taking breaks from your work by making sure that you are either exercising at home or getting out. As we said, we're still having a lot of sun these days in California. Staying informed about what's going on, but also knowing when to unplug, and knowing when, okay, I've already watched my news for the day. I'm no longer going to be feverishly checking the news sites to see about the latest numbers. So again, it is important to stay informed, but it's also important to know how to unplug. And then I think, if there are any things that you were hoping to finish that you just feel like you don't have time to do, like I myself, one of the things I've started to do is I have a couple of offices I work out of, and I've just been piling some stuff up. So cleaning out a couple of my offices, reorganizing some things, doing a lot of recycling, getting some bags ready for clothes that we no longer use in the garage, planning some projects like that. Things that we normally feel like we don't have time to do, now we have time to do. And so maybe making a list of things that before you were a little too busy to do, and maybe checking off one or two of those things. Don't try not to be too ambitious, but maybe try to do one or two things off that list, so that you can get to some things that maybe you wanted to. Maybe there's some movies on your Netflix list that you want to get to. Maybe there's some books that you wanted to read but never really had the time to, and now maybe you can work that into your day. I've discovered some new podcasts that some friends have turned me on to. Actually, some of my students have turned me on to some podcasts on health and well-being, some funny ones. Some bands I follow now are putting out some podcasts. So I'm engaging in some of the things that I normally don't get to, and I would invite other people who are listening to this to do the same.
Well, again, thank you very much for your time today. Honestly, this has been a really informative experience, not just for people watching, but I definitely learned a lot while you were speaking. So I definitely appreciate you coming on and doing this for us. Again, that's all we have for today. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to say?
Well, actually, Justin and Ben, I was going to ask the two of you how you got involved in this project, and what is it that interests you in this topic of mental health?
So me and Ben, again, we're a part of YCI, which is just an off branch of what YCS is, Youth Community
Mhm.
Service.
Mhm.
So basically what we do while we're in YCI, we'd have weekly meetings just talking about, hey, what can we do to really unify just Palo Alto, just peers, family, parents, teachers alike. What we do is we have discussions about what we can do. We're divided into three groups of we there's people that will work on just social media, just broadcasting like, hey, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna set up an event at Stanford where
Mm.
this could be a bunch of bands playing. This is something that we have done in the past. We had an open mic at Stanford and it went really well. Those bands that came from San Jose, local bands, and you just got to connect with the community. As for YCI, our whole initiative is just to connect with everyone. Youth Connectedness Initiative. That's what it stands for.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Personally, I was asked to be a part of this. I was really close with those original. I forgot what the role's called. Sorry, it's escaped from my mind. But a really close friend of mine, Mustafa, had a sister that was working with this project,
Mm-hmm.
which was
Okay.
YCI. I
Mm-hmm.
told her, hey, I'd love to be more involved with my community, stuff like that. It was just a casual car conversation while we're just driving. She's like, hey, I'm actually creating this initiative where the peers get to work together from different schools and be more involved with the community. Are you interested? And me, along with 5 other close friends of mine, all joined together and started what was the beginning of YCI.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and from there, we were able to stem from making videos about mental health. We created events that allowed parents and peers to really get to know each other. We had this time of this one event called Talk to Me. It displayed one of the videos that we had that we created from YCI, and we just established that into a parent discussion of like, hey, what can we possibly do to help our children, and
Mm-hmm.
what kind of feedback can we get from like kids in the community.
Right.
So um, honestly, it's been a great experience working with YCI. I definitely feel like being a part of this initiative, I was able to really span out to my community and feel that I'm really a part of what's going on here in Palo Alto. So I can't really explain for Ben's perspective, but I bet he can do it himself.
Why we're
That's really
doing
helpful.
depression
Yeah,
involvement?
Ben.
Yeah, still here. um, I think we chose depression. We had this meeting months ago when we were trying to figure out video topics and what we wanted to cover. It's very prevalent in the community. We've all had friends that have experienced this, or we've experienced it ourselves, and we
Yeah.
figured that'd be a really good place to start to reach out to people and show who we are and what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
I
that's
came on
great.
through Justin actually. He recruited me
Okay.
earlier this year, and
Mhm.
I enjoyed it, so I kept showing up, and now I'm part of it.
Well, I'm really, really happy you guys are doing this. It's really important work, and the young people doing the work, the youth-led initiatives have often been the ones that have had the most traction and sustainability in the community. Um, the last thing I'll reference, speaking of young people taking the initiative, when we taught in the living skills courses for a number of years in the sort of early 2000 teens, so like from roughly 2011 till about 2015. And we created a list of FAQs, frequently asked questions, from those classes in living skills where we're teaching about depression, talking about the very things that we are here on this Zoomcast. And we put together the 20 or 30 most often asked questions and the answers to those on the Herd Alliance website. So if you just search FAQs, you'll see the most frequently asked, which you actually covered most of those or many of those questions. Obviously, we covered some updates given what we're going through as a community right now with COVID-19. But if you want another resource there on Herd Alliance, you can find the answers to a lot of the questions you might be thinking of, because we had at the time worked with about 500 students every summer over the course of 5 summers. So you do the math, that's, around 2,500 students, and their frequently asked questions were about 20 to 30 that kept coming up. What's depression? How do I know the difference between everyday moodiness? How do I get help for a friend? What is medication to treat? Why is that a good idea or a bad idea? What's talk therapy? What's the difference between anxiety and depression? All the kinds of things that teenagers think about and are very important. So I would just direct you to that as another resource that was created by the youth community here, and it's sort of the the sustainable part of what was created in those classes. And you doing this Zoomcast, I think, is a really nice reminder of how how fortunate we are to have people like you really not only asking these questions, but putting yourselves out there, creating this content for other people to be able to view and learn from. So thanks for the work you do, and keep on keeping on.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
man. Thank you so much.
That about wraps it. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Joshi. We really appreciate your time here. Yeah, that's all we got for today.
Thank you. My pleasure.